Have you ever lain awake at night, feeling the invisible threads of another's soul pulling at your own, wondering why the pain of betrayal lingers not in your body, but in the depths of your spirit? You sense it, don't you, that subtle tyranny, the narcissistic abuse that devours without a trace. It's not the bruises others see, it's the fractures in the psyche, the unseen wounds where light once flowed freely. Picture this, you the empath, a vessel open to the world's currents. Absorbing joy, yes, but also the poison, the rage, the despair. And then the narcissist appears. Not by chance, but by archetypal decree. A dance of shadows where one feeds and the other is drained. But listen closely. This is no mere tragedy. It's an initiation, a path through darkness to something profound. What if I told you the final stage isn't healing as you know it? Not a return to innocence, but a transmutation. A rebirth where the wound becomes wisdom. You've felt the pull of this truth, haven't you? That secret whisper in your heart saying, there's more to your suffering. Stay with me. This journey will reveal the light within the abyss. I am Carl Jung, explorer of the unconscious. Through decades of delving into dreams and archetypes, I've witnessed souls shattered by such abuse. But I've also seen them rise, not as victims, but as alchemists of their own fate. If you're here, it's because your psyche calls you. Let's step into the forest together. When we speak of suffering, particularly the suffering born from the subtle tyranny of another soul, we do not merely speak of wounds in the flesh or visible scars that others can see. We speak instead of wounds in the unseen, the trembling fractures of the psyche, the invisible places where the spirit has been pierced, drained, manipulated, and deceived. Narcissistic abuse is not simply cruelty enacted in the open. It is often enacted in silence, in shadows and whispers that burrow beneath the conscious mind and seat themselves in the unconscious. And the one who suffers most deeply from this is often the empath, the soul whose essence is built upon openness, receptivity, and a profound instinct to merge with the emotional undercurrents of others. The empath is like a vessel without a lid, absorbing not only the beauty and vitality of the world, but also its poison, its rage, its despair. When such a one encounters a narcissist, the archetype of devouring hunger and hollow self-idolatry, the meeting is not accidental. It is an archetypal dance, a ritual in which one is consumed and the other is fed. Yet paradoxically, this encounter is also a path, for what is wounded within the empath is precisely that which must awaken. And what appears to be destruction is in fact an initiation. The narcissist, in their shadowed role, becomes an unwilling initiator, a dark priest forcing the empath to confront the final crucible of their own becoming. But what is this final stage? Many believe healing is a return, a restoration to some imagined purity before the wound, before the trauma, before the betrayal. Yet this is not true individuation. The final stage of the empath is not to return, but to transmute. The empath cannot go back to who they were before the narcissist entered their life. That door is sealed. For to return is to undo the initiation. Instead, the empath must move forward into a state that transcends both victim and savior, into a new form of selfhood, where they no longer exist as a receptacle of others' projections, nor as a martyr to their own longing to heal what cannot be healed. The final stage is the integration of shadow, the acceptance of the archetype of the wounded healer, and the awakening of the self beyond the illusions of both pain and idealized love. Imagine, if you will, the dream of an empath who has endured long years under the gaze of a narcissist. In the dream, they walk through a forest at night, carrying a lantern that glows faintly. Shadows press in from all sides. Suddenly, they see before them a figure beautiful, radiant, magnetic. The figure smiles, takes their hand, and whispers promises of light and warmth. Entranced, the empath follows deeper into the forest, only to find the figure fading, disappearing into the dark, leaving them alone with the lantern extinguished. Here is the essential experience of narcissistic abuse, the illusion of light that vanishes, the betrayal of trust, the sudden plunge into darkness. Yet the dream does not end there. For in the silence, the empath looks down and realizes that their hands are glowing faintly, their skin itself emitting the light they sought from another. This is the final stage, the moment of realization that the light was never in the narcissist, nor in the projections of their false promises. The light was always within. The empath, so long trained to reflect, to mirror, to absorb, must finally become the source. The narcissist becomes the crucible, the shadow teacher, forcing the empath to discover that their energy need not be harvested from another, but emanates from the self, from the archetype of wholeness buried in the depths of the psyche. This stage, however, is not reached easily. It comes only after despair, only after the death of illusions. Many resist this death. The empath often clings to the fantasy that if they love more deeply, endure more patiently, forgive more expansively, the narcissist will finally reveal their hidden heart. This is the archetype of the redeemer gone astray, the healer consumed by the wound. Yet as I have seen in countless souls, there comes a breaking point. The empath awakens one day, not with anger, nor even with grief, but with a strange stillness. It is as though something in them has finally dissolved the need to prove their worth through suffering, the compulsion to heal the unhealable. In the stillness, the empath recognizes that what they were chasing was not love, but a reflection of their own unlived shadow. The narcissist, in truth, is a mirror of the empath's disowned hunger, their own secret yearning to be seen, without giving endlessly to be adored, without effort to be the center of another's world. The empath who has so long judged this desire as selfish or unworthy projects, it outward and encounters it embodied in the narcissist. Thus, the dance is not merely interpersonal. It is archetypal, a union of opposites in distortion. Only when the empath dares to reclaim this disowned hunger, to acknowledge that they too contain a shadow that longs for recognition, can the projection dissolve. The narcissist then loses their power, for they no longer carry the disowned piece of the empath's soul. And so the final stage is not forgiveness in the shallow sense, nor is it vengeance. It is integration. It is the empath looking into the abyss of what they have endured, and recognizing in it the pattern of the psyche's deepest law, that wholeness can only emerge when light and shadow are reconciled. To reject the narcissist entirely is to reject the shadow. To cling to them is to remain ensnared in projection. But to see them as the dark midwife of one's own individuation is to achieve freedom. Consider the archetype of the alchemist working at their furnace. The base material, corrupted and impure, is placed into the fire. The alchemist does not despise the base material, nor does he worship it. He subjects it to fire, to dissolution, to transformation. So it is with the empath. The narcissist is the lead, heavy, toxic, unrefined. The empath is the alchemist, though they do not realize it at first. Through suffering, they are forced into the furnace of despair. And in that crucible, they awaken to their own capacity to transmute. When they emerge, they are no longer led victims, but beings of gold, luminous, not because they are untouched by darkness, but because they have passed through it and claimed its wisdom. Yet I must warn you, this stage is not the triumph of the ego. Many empaths, upon breaking free, believe they have conquered, that they are stronger, superior, immune. But this is merely another mask of the ego, a brittle defense against vulnerability. The true final stage is humility before the self. It is the recognition that one's survival, one's awakening, was not the work of egoic will, but the unfolding of the self, of the archetype of totality that guides each soul toward individuation. The empath bows before this inner self, realizing that even the darkest suffering was part of a larger design, a mysterious pattern in which nothing was wasted. I have seen patients who, after long years of abuse, described themselves as dead, hollow, emptied. Yet when they began to dream again, when symbols arose from the unconscious, I witnessed a rebirth. One dreamed of a serpent shedding its skin, leaving behind the pale husk of its former self. Another dreamed of a cracked vase from which flowers bloomed despite the brokenness. These images are not random. They are the psyche's testimony that the final stage is not annihilation, but transformation, not emptiness, but renewal. The empath, when they arrive here, no longer seeks to merge blindly with others. They recognize the sacred boundary of the self, not as a wall, but as a membrane that breathes in and out, allowing connection without annihilation. They become healers not by compulsively absorbing pain, but by radiating presence. They laugh without desperation, forgive without erasing themselves, give without self-destruction. The narcissist no longer defines them. The shadow no longer frightens them. They have become whole, and in that wholeness, they are finally free. This is the mystery. The empath's final stage is not weakness overcome, nor power seized, but self-realized. It is a return to the archetypal center, where the opposites reconcile, where the wound becomes the source of wisdom, and where the soul discovers that even the darkest initiations serve the light of individuation. There's a peculiar silence that arrives when the empath begins to step out of the labyrinth of abuse. It is not the silence of peace at first, but of emptiness. Many describe it as though they are standing in a vast, abandoned hall where the echoes of voices once tormented them, and now there is only the ringing of their own footsteps. This silence is terrifying to one who has lived so long by tuning themselves to the emotions of others. For the empath has known themselves primarily through reflection, through mirroring the grief of another, through feeling the unspoken despair of a partner, through absorbing currents of pain that swirl around them like invisible winds. When that mirror is shattered, when the narcissist is gone, when the tether is cut, the empath is left with a question they can no longer avoid. Who am I without the storm? This question is the threshold of the final stage. For only in the barren silence of this hall can the true self speak. The empath begins to sense that what they called compassion was at times a defense against their own terror of abandonment, that what they called love was sometimes a refusal to meet their own emptiness. Here, the archetype of the desert arises. The desert is the place where every false oasis must be revealed as illusion, where the wanderer is forced to confront thirst until they realize the spring is within. The empath, stripped of external anchors, feels the scorching heat of solitude. Yet within this solitude, the first seed of individuation germinates. Often dreams appear at this stage. I recall one in which a patient described being pursued through endless corridors by a shadowy figure. At last, they entered a room with no doors and no windows. The pursuer vanished, leaving them alone. In the center of the room was a mirror. As they gazed, they saw their reflection dissolve into light. This is the psyche's way of showing that what they flee, what they fear in the narcissist, is ultimately an image leading back to themselves. The abuser has forced them into the room without exits, the place where they must finally encounter the self. And though at first it seems a prison, it becomes a birthplace of liberation. It is not unusual for the empath to feel anger rising here, anger not only at the narcissist, but at themselves, at their own complicity, their own blindness, their own ceaseless giving. This anger is sacred. Too often empaths have been taught that anger is forbidden, that to be good is to be endlessly patient, endlessly forgiving. Yet repressed anger festers in the unconscious, breeding resentment and self-betrayal. When the anger finally erupts, it is not a regression, but a movement toward wholeness. For anger, when integrated, becomes the fire that burns away illusion and establishes boundaries. Without it, the empath remains a saintly ghost drained of vitality. With it, they begin to stand in their own body, to claim their right to exist not only for others, but for themselves. This is where the shadow work deepens. For the empath must admit the shadow of their own desire for control and their own unconscious manipulation through self-sacrifice. Yes, it is painful to see, but here lies the truth. The empath has not been only victim. They have also derived identity power, even moral superiority from their role as giver, healer, martyr. To admit this does not negate the cruelty of the narcissist, but it brings balance. It rescues the empath from the prison of innocence. True individuation does not rest on the fantasy of being purely good, but on embracing the paradox that we are light and darkness wounded and wounding healer and manipulator. Only when the empath sees their reflection in this dark mirror do they become free of the compulsive need to repeat the pattern. Consider again the alchemical image, the conjunction of opposites. The empath and the narcissist are two poles of the same archetypal spectrum. One giving without end of the other, taking without limit. Both are imbalanced expressions of the same psychic energy. The final stage for the empath is to integrate the very qualities they projected outward. They must learn to say no, to stand in the center, to embody a healthy measure of what the narcissist distorted self-assertion their power. The narcissist took these to extremes divorced from empathy. The empath must reclaim them, tempered by compassion. In this synthesis, they become whole. At this point, many describe feeling as though they are shedding a skin, much like the serpent. The old identity of the boundless giver cracks and falls away. The empath begins to experience themselves as a sovereign being, not merely a reflection of others' needs. They discover a paradoxical truth. Only when they stop absorbing others' pain compulsively do they actually begin to heal others authentically. This is because healing now flows not from depletion, but from overflow, from the radiance of a self that has tasted its own depths. There is a profound archetype at work here, the wounded healer. The empath who has endured narcissistic abuse becomes in time one who can guide others through the same labyrinth. But unlike before, when they sought to heal in order to secure love, now they heal because healing is the natural fruit of their own wholeness. They no longer need to rescue in order to justify their existence. They have passed through death and rebirth, and what they give now is not desperation, but wisdom. Yet I caution you, the path is not linear. The final stage does not erase the past, nor does it immunize the empath against future wounds. Rather, it equips them with awareness. They may still encounter narcissists, still feel the pull of old patterns, but now a voice within whispers, "This is the shadow's dance. You need not enter again." The empath may feel the temptation, but no longer confuses it with destiny. This is freedom not from pain, but from compulsion. The image that often comes is of a butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. The chrysalis itself was formed by suffering, by the suffocating grip of manipulation. Within it, the empath dissolved their old identity, liquefied. And then, at the appointed time, the wings unfold, fragile, at first trembling, but soon carrying them into realms they never imagined. The narcissist, once the captor, has, in truth, been the cocoon, the dark container within which transformation occurred. And here lies the mystical dimension. In the language of myth, the empath has undergone a descent into the underworld. They have been Orpheus searching for love in the depths, only to lose it. They have been Persephone abducted into Hades, forced to eat the pomegranate seeds of shadow. And like all initiates, they return changed, carrying within them a knowledge that cannot be taught by words alone. They have touched the archetypal night and emerged bearing the light of the consciousness. This is why I say the final stage is not merely recovery. Recovery implies going back. But individuation is never about going back, it is about becoming. The empath, after narcissistic abuse, is no longer who they were. They are not merely healed, they are transfigured. And this transfiguration carries a responsibility to live authentically, to no longer betray themselves, to honor the voice of the self above the clamors of others. So the silence that once terrified them becomes the silence of inner strength. They learn to dwell in solitude without collapse, to feel without drowning, to love without losing themselves. Their compassion deepens paradoxically because it now includes themselves. They see the narcissist not as an eternal enemy, but as an embodiment of shadow, a figure that forced them to claim their own soul. And in this recognition, forgiveness may come, not the shallow forgiveness of condoning harm, but the profound forgiveness of understanding that even the darkest figures serve the mystery of wholeness. This then is the empath's final revelation, that they were never powerless, never broken, never defined by the abuse. They were undergoing an initiation written in the archetypal language of the psyche. And now, standing on the other side, they carry not only scars, but symbols, not only memories, but meaning. The narcissist has taken much. But in taking, they have paradoxically given the empath themselves. There's a moment often quiet and unnoticed by the outer world when the empath feels the first pulse of a deeper center within themselves. It comes not as triumph nor as grand revelation, but as a subtle whisper you no longer need to beg for what you already are. This whisper is the self long buried under layers of projection finally rising to the surface. And in that rising, a new stage of existence begins, one that is not defined by how much pain they can carry, nor how deeply they can love the unlovable, but by how clearly they can see the patterns of the psyche that have bound them. For too long, the empath has been trapped in the archetypal dance of savior and victim. The narcissist played the role of predator, but underneath this was the empath's secret agreement to keep giving, so as not to face their own shadow. And now at last, the curtain has lifted, and the empath sees that their suffering was not meaningless, but it was also not accidental. The psyche does not permit such intensity without purpose. The self guides through symbols, through projections, through relationships that seem fated until the soul can no longer avoid its own hidden truth. The empath begins to notice dreams that shift in tone. Once their dreams were filled with pursuit, with helplessness, with endless labyrinths. Now images emerge of thresholds, of gates, of bridges. One dream I remember described by a patient was of standing on a cliff and seeing a bridge of light extending across an abyss. At first they hesitated, terrified of the void, but then they realized the light came from their own chest, creating the path forward. Such images are not hallucinations. They are revelations of the unconscious, pointing toward the stage of wholeness. The empath is no longer fleeing the shadow. They are building the way forward with their own essence. But this forward path demands sacrifice. It demands the death of old identities, old comforts, old illusions. The empath must relinquish the belief that their worth is tied to suffering, that their love can rescue what is unwilling to change, that martyrdom is noble. These illusions, while once necessary for survival, now become poison. If they cling, they will stagnate, repeating the same cycles with new faces. Only when they dare to let the old self die can the new self emerge. This is why so many describe this stage as a kind of death. It is a descent not only into grief for what was lost, but grief for the self that never truly existed, the self that was always defined by others. In this grief, the archetype of the phoenix comes alive. The fire burns away the false feathers. The ashes consume what was illusory. And from the ashes, something winged and immortal arises. The empath, through pain, is reborn not as a vessel, but as a flame. And yet, paradoxically, this rebirth does not lead them away from the world, but deeper into it. Where once they dissolved into others, now they meet others as equals, not as savior or victim. Their compassion no longer imprisons them, for it is bound to the truth of discernment. They can say no without guilt, yes, without desperation. They can witness suffering without drowning in it. They can love without losing their center. This is the fruit of individuation, to stand whole and allow others to be whole without compulsion, to control either through giving or withholding. The empath now encounters the archetype of the wise elder within themselves. This figure may appear in dreams as a guide, a sage, a mysterious figure who speaks in riddles. At first, the empath resists, for they have long believed wisdom must come from someone else, someone stronger, someone more powerful. But gradually, they realize this elder is their own soul speaking back to them from the depths. The wisdom they sought in the narcissist, the promise of validation, the aura of certainty, was always a distorted reflection of this inner elder. Now they begin to listen inwardly, to trust the voice that whispers not in manipulation, but in truth. Yet even here, the journey is not without trials. The empath, now awakening to their own wholeness, may feel estranged from the world they once knew. They may look at friends, family, society, and see patterns of unconscious manipulation everywhere. At first, this can feel isolating, as though they have ascended a lonely mountain. But in time, they see that this vision is not meant to separate them, but to empower them. For once one has passed through the crucible of narcissistic abuse and emerged with a self intact, they are uniquely equipped to shine light into the collective shadow. This stage of integration is not merely about personal liberation, but about embodying a new way of being in the world. The empath begins to notice subtle shifts in their daily interactions. Where once they would have rushed to soothe another's pain, they now pause, assessing whether their involvement is truly needed or if it risks their own depletion. This pause is not selfishness, but sovereignty, a recognition that their energy is sacred and must be honored. Consider the metaphor of a river. In their earlier life, the empath was like a riverbed, constantly reshaped by the torrents of others' emotions eroding under the weight of their needs. Now they become the river itself, flowing from a source within, steady and self-sustaining. Their waters nourish others, but they no longer allow themselves to be diverted or dammed by external demands. This shift is profound. It is the difference between being a passive container and an active force of nature. The empath's newfound sovereignty manifests in practical ways. They might set boundaries in relationships that once drained them, choosing to engage only where there is mutual respect. They might decline invitations that feel misaligned with their inner truth, trusting that saying no is an act of self-love, not rejection. They might choose solitude over company, not out of fear, but because they have learned to cherish their own presence. This is where the archetype of the wounded healer comes into its fullest expression. The empath, having navigated the labyrinth of narcissistic abuse, becomes a guide for others, not by absorbing their pain, but by showing them the path to their own center. They do this not through grand gestures, but through quiet acts of presence. A kind word, a moment of true listening, a story shared from their own journey. These become seeds planted in the hearts of others, sparking their own awakening. Let me share a story to illustrate this stage. A man named Elias came to me after years of entanglement with a narcissistic partner who demanded his constant attention and validation. Elias described himself as a sponge soaking up his partner's moods until he felt he had no self left. His dreams were filled with images of being swallowed by a great beast. Through our work, he began to see this beast as his own unclaimed power projected onto his partner. As he integrated this insight, his dreams shifted. He began to dream of standing on a mountain holding a staff that glowed with inner light. In one dream, he faced the beast again, but this time he did not run. He extended the staff, and the beast dissolved into mist. Elias awoke with a sense of calm he had not known before. He left the relationship not with hatred, but with clarity. Over time, he became a mentor for young men, guiding them through their own struggles with identity and power. His presence, he told me, was not something he forced. It flowed naturally from the man he had become. This story reveals the essence of integration, and the empath becomes a beacon, not by striving, but by being. Their journey through narcissistic abuse has forged a rare quality, a blend of strength and softness, wisdom and humility, presence and detachment. They are no longer defined by their wounds, but by the wisdom they have gained. Yet this stage is not without its challenges. The empath must remain vigilant, for the world is full of those who seek to drain, to demand, and to pull others into their unintegrated shadows. The empath learns to recognize the subtle signs of manipulation, the flattery that seeks to bind the guilt, that seeks to control the chaos, that seeks to consume. They do not reject these energies out of fear, but they navigate them with discernment, choosing when to engage and when to step back. This discernment is a skill honed through practice. The empath might journal to clarify their own needs, meditate to reconnect with their inner voice, or seek out communities that honor mutual growth. They learn to ask themselves, does this serve my wholeness, before giving their energy to others? This question becomes a compass, guiding them through the complexities of human relationships. Another metaphor that emerges here is that of the weaver. The empath in this stage becomes a weaver of their own life's tapestry. Each thread, the pain of abuse, the courage of breaking free, the wisdom of integration, is carefully woven into a pattern that is uniquely theirs. The narcissist's thread, once dominant and destructive, is now just one among many, its darkness balanced by the brighter hues of self-discovery and growth. The empath no longer sees their life as a series of wounds, but as a work of art still in progress, ever evolving. This weaving is not a solitary act. The empath begins to seek out others who are also weaving their own tapestries. Those who value authenticity, who honor boundaries, who seek growth over comfort. These connections are not based on need or dependency, but on mutual recognition of the self. The empath finds that their relationships become mirrors of their own wholeness, reflecting back their strength rather than their wounds. Yet even as they weave this new tapestry, the empath must confront moments of doubt. The old patterns of self-sacrifice can resurface, especially in moments of vulnerability. They might feel a pang of guilt for setting boundaries, or a flicker of fear that they are being selfish. These moments are not failures, but opportunities to deepen their integration. By acknowledging these feelings without being ruled by them, the empath strengthens their connection to the self. Dreams at this stage often reflect this weaving process. One patient described a dream of sitting at a loom, threading strands of light and shadow into a cloth that shimmered with both. Another dreamed of walking through a forest where the trees were woven from vines, each knot a moment of their life, painful and joyful alike. These dreams are the psyche's way of affirming that the empath is no longer a passive recipient of life's forces, but an active creator, shaping their reality with intention. The integration stage also brings a deeper connection to the body. For so long, the empath may have lived disconnected from their physical self, their energy consumed by the emotional demands of others. Now they begin to listen to their body's wisdom, the tightness in their chest that signals a boundary being crossed, the warmth in their heart that signals alignment with their truth. They might take up practices like yoga dance or mindful walking, not as escapes, but as ways to embody their wholeness. This embodiment extends to their voice. Where once they may have silenced themselves to avoid conflict, they now speak their truth with clarity and compassion. This does not mean they become confrontational or harsh. Rather, their words carry the weight of authenticity. They learn to express their needs, to share their story, to say no when necessary, all without losing the empathy that defines them. The empath also begins to see the broader implications of their journey. The narcissistic abuse they endured is not just a personal story, but a microcosm of the collective shadow. In a world driven by power control and validation, and the narcissist is a symptom, a distorted reflection of a culture disconnected from the self. The empath, by integrating their shadow, becomes a counterpoint, a living testament to the possibility of wholeness in a fragmented world. They may feel drawn to spaces where transformation is needed, communities, organizations, or cultural discourse. They enter these spaces not to fight or dominate, but to illuminate. Their presence becomes a quiet rebellion against manipulation and disconnection. They challenge the status quo not with anger, but with the undeniable truth of their own being. Yet this influence carries risks. The empath's growing radiance may attract those who seek to borrow or feed on their light. Here, the lessons of the past are vital. The empath must remember that their light is for sharing, not taking, and that true connection respects each soul's sovereignty. They hold fast to their boundaries, giving from overflow, not depletion. This stage also opens a spiritual dimension. For many, the journey through narcissistic abuse unlocks a connection to the numinous, a sense of something greater, transcending the personal. They may explore meditation, prayer, or ritual not as escapes, but as ways to deepen their connection to the self and the archetypes guiding it. This spiritual awakening is not about dogma, but experience. The empath has tasted the psyche's mystery, walked the underworld, and emerged with the fire of consciousness. They know the self is both personal and universal, finite and infinite, and this knowing becomes their anchor and guide. Consider the archetype of the bridge, which often appears in dreams at this stage. The empath sees themselves standing on a bridge, one foot in the world of shadow, the other in the world of light. They are no longer pulled to one side or the other, but stand in the center, embodying the tension of opposites. This bridge is not just a symbol, but a way of life, a commitment to living in balance, honoring both the human and the divine within. The empath also begins to redefine love. Where once love was a desperate attempt to fill a void, it now becomes an expression of fullness. They love not to be completed, but because they are complete. This love is not blind or self-sacrificing, but discerning, rooted in the truth of who they are. They can love others without losing themselves, offer compassion without dissolving, and connect without merging. This redefinition of love extends to their relationship with themselves. The empath learns to offer themselves the same compassion they once reserved for others. They forgive themselves for the years spent in the narcissist's shadow, for the times they betrayed their own needs, for the illusions they clung to. This self-forgiveness is not a one-time act, but a daily practice, a gentle acknowledgement of their humanity. In this stage, the empath also discovers the power of play. For so long, their life was heavy with the weight of others' emotions. Now they find joy in lightness, in laughter, in creativity, in moments of spontaneity. They might paint for the sheer joy of color dance, for the freedom of movement, or write for the pleasure of words. This play is not frivolous, but sacred, a celebration of their reclaimed vitality. The integration stage is also a time of reconnection with the world. The empath, having found their center, begins to see beauty where they once saw only pain. They notice the kindness in a stranger's smile, the resilience in a friend's story, the quiet strength in a tree standing alone. This reconnection is not naive, but grounded, born of a deep understanding of life's dualities. Yet even as they reconnect, the empath remains aware of their own fragility. They know that wholeness does not mean invulnerability. They may still feel the sting of rejection, the ache of loneliness, the pull of old patterns. But now, they meet these feelings with curiosity rather than fear. They ask, "What is this teaching me?" and listen for the answer within. This curiosity becomes a lifelong companion. The empath, now integrated, understands that individuation is not a destination, but a journey. Each experience, whether joyful or painful, is an invitation to deepen their connection to the self. They embrace this journey not with dread, but with reverence, knowing that every step brings them closer to their own truth. In this way, the empath becomes a living paradox, whole, yet evolving, grounded, yet transcendent, human, yet touched by the divine. They carry their wounds as sacred marks, their light as a gift offered from fullness, not need. They no longer seek validation, for they have found it within. They no longer seek to save, for they know each soul walks its own path. They no longer fear the shadow, for they have claimed its wisdom. And so they live not as victims or saviors, but as themselves, radiant, whole, free. They are the ones who walked through fire and emerged, forged, not burned. They faced the devourer and found their power. They shed their old skin and now soar with wings of light. It is here in this final stage that the empath steps fully into their transformed self, radiating a presence that is both beacon and balm. Many become healers, therapists, artists, mystics, not because they are driven to save the world, but because their very being embodies the integration of shadow and light. Others sense it an authenticity, a steadiness, a compassion free of agenda. In this presence, others glimpse their own potential for awakening, as if the empath's light casts a reflection that stirs the soul. This is the empath's final gift, not the compulsive overgiving of their former self, but the natural overflow of wholeness. Understand this: the final stage is not perfection. The empath does not become immune to fear, pain, or the longing for love. These are threads of the human tapestry, ever present. But now, these emotions no longer govern unconsciously. They are seen, held, and released with a clarity that comes from knowing the self. The transformed empath can observe their shadow without being consumed by it. They can acknowledge their wounds without collapsing into them. They can encounter another narcissist and, rather than being drawn into the old dance, recognize the archetypal pattern instantly and step aside with grace. This is mastery not of domination over others, but of consciousness over the self. From a mystical perspective, this is the soul's return to its axis, the mandala of the self, a circle with a center point. For so long, the empath orbited outside, caught in the gravitational pull of others' needs, shadows, and illusions. Now they return to the center. From this vantage point, the opposites love and anger, light and dark, giving and receiving, no longer tear them apart. They see these as parts of the same whole, interwoven threads in the fabric of existence. They no longer fear the shadow, for they know it is the gate to wisdom. They no longer idolize the light, for they understand that light without shadow blinds rather than illuminates. They have entered the sacred tension of opposites, and in this tension, they are whole. It is as if the empath becomes a living symbol, their life a myth, not a fantasy, but an embodiment of archetypal truth. They are the hero who descended into the underworld and returned with the fire of consciousness, the warrior who faced the devourer and emerged unconsumed, the alchemist who shed the old skin and now walks with wings. In their story, others see their own. The cycle of abuse is broken, replaced by a cycle of awakening. This is why I say the final stage of the empath, after narcissistic abuse, is not survival, but individuation. The journey from projection to possession to integration, from shadow to self. The empath ceases to be defined by the wound and becomes defined by the wholeness that grew from it. They are not only healed, but healers. Not only free, but liberators. Not only whole, but symbols of what it means to be fully human. As the empath steps into this stage, their perception shifts profoundly. The world, once a battlefield of givers and takers, reveals itself as a tapestry of archetypes woven by forces greater than any single personality. The narcissist is no longer merely the abuser, but an embodiment of the devouring archetype, the unintegrated shadow of hunger. The empath is no longer just the victim, but the archetype of the open vessel, the essence of receptivity. Their collision is painful, even devastating. But through the lens of depth psychology, it is clear these are not mere tragedies. They are initiations into the mystery of the self. The empath begins to see their suffering as part of a myth that is both personal and universal. They recognize themselves in ancient stories, Inanna stripped bare in the underworld, Christ bearing the cross, the wounded healer who finds medicine in their own wound. This recognition does not erase the pain, but transforms it into meaning. For meaning is what the soul craves most, not the avoidance of suffering, but its transmutation into purpose. At this stage, a surge of creative energy often emerges. What once drained the empath now fuels them. The pain that silenced their voice now demands expression. Some turn to writing, painting, singing, or counseling, channeling their journey into forms that resonate with others. Others simply live with a radiance that cannot be hidden, embodying the truth they have uncovered. The self once revealed is not content to remain silent. It presses outward, shaping life in alignment with its truth. The empath, by becoming whole, becomes a vessel for the archetypal forces that pulse through every human being. Yet there is humility here. The empath knows they are not beyond shadow, not immune to projection, not elevated above others. They know the fragility of the psyche, the subtlety of manipulation, the ease with which illusion can resurface. This humility is the hallmark of true integration, for they understand they are human, not divine, finite, not invulnerable. But they also know that the self within them is larger than their fragility, that wholeness is not perfection, but integration. This stage is marked by paradox. The empath feels stronger, yet softer, more discerning, yet more compassionate, more whole, yet more aware of their own complexity. They can look back on their story and see both the cruelty and the gift. They no longer need to erase the darkness to honor the light. Both are woven into their being. In this paradox, they find peace, not the absence of conflict, but the serenity of standing in the center of life's opposites without being torn apart. Dreams at this stage often reveal mandalas, circles, spirals, or images of union. One dreamer spoke of finding a garden within a ruined city where flowers bloomed through cracks in the stone. Another described swimming in dark waters, discovering pearls glowing at the bottom. These are not accidents, but the psyche's affirmation of integration. And the ruined city of abuse now holds a secret garden, and the dark waters of suffering conceal treasures found only through descent. Here, forgiveness emerges not as obligation or denial, but as a natural consequence of wholeness. The empath does not excuse the narcissist's cruelty, but they see that clinging to hatred binds them to the abuser. Forgiveness is not a gift to the narcissist, but to the self a release of resentment's chains, a letting go of the shadow to its rightful place in the depths. In this release, the empath is no longer defined by what was done to them, but by what they have become, a bearer of light, forged in darkness, a healer who has walked through the wound, a soul who has touched both shadow and self and emerged intact. They are no longer merely an empath, but a whole human being. The narcissist was a crucible, but the fire revealed gold. This is why the final stage is not survival, but transfiguration. They live as themselves, radiant, whole, unafraid of their own depths, embodying the truth that the psyche seeks not safety, but wholeness. Not avoidance of shadow, but its integration. In living this truth, they become a symbol for others, a reminder that even the darkest initiations lead to the birth of the self. So I leave you with this: do not despise the path you have walked, however cruel. Do not seek to erase the past, for it is the seed of your transformation. Do not cling to illusions of purity or perfect goodness, for wholeness lies beyond such illusions. Stand in the center of your being. Look into the shadow without fear. Listen to the whisper of the self and know you have passed through the fire. What remains is not the fragile vessel you once